The benefits of Soviet brutalist architecture, part 2. In the last video, I completely forgot to mention the biggest benefit of living in one of these Soviet apartment blocks, which is that they were practically free. Government gave these to people, and once you had one, you only had to pay for utilities. And that was usually less than 10% of your take-home pay. So yes, they were small and you had a lot of neighbors, but given the popularity of tiny homes and van life, I would say that a lot of Americans would gladly downsize their living spaces if it meant a drastic reduction in the amount they have to pay for housing. The thing you have to consider is what people were living in before these apartment blocks were built. This is my grandfather, and this house behind him is where his family lived. This was in the 1950s. And you can see that it is a log cabin and it's only got one story. If you weren't living in one of these, you were likely living in a kommunalka, a communal apartment, which meant that you had one room in a big apartment, and that's the room you lived in with your family with a bunch of strangers. So this was an upgrade for a lot of people. You lived with just your family in your apartment. You didn't have to share a kitchen or a bathroom with a bunch of other families. This actually looks a lot like the one I lived in until I was 5 years old. And some of them were really cool. Like, look at this one. And the thing I really want to get across is that the culture was different. There was not the same kind of sense of individuality as there is in the US. People did not live alone. There was not enough housing for that. He sees a bird. The other thing is that a lot of families had dachas, which was a little cabin in the countryside that you could go to for vacation. And since vacation was usually about a month in the summer, a lot of people did that. And so you could get out of the city and enjoy rural life, mushroom picking, barbecuing, things like that. And the last thing I want to mention is that these Khrushchevkas were only meant to be housing for 25 years until more housing, better housing could be built. And they've now been around for about 60 years. They've outlived the government that created them, sometimes with little to no maintenance. I'm not endorsing this. I'm just saying there are some benefits to these apartment buildings. There were some for the Soviet Union. A lot of people still live in these kinds of housing.